This first story comes from a Reddit user who wishes to remain anonymous. He was working as a night security guard at an abandoned shopping mall in Ohio that was scheduled for demolition. The pay was decent, and all he had to do was make sure no vandals or copper thieves broke in during his 12-hour shifts. The mall had been closed for 3 years, and most of the stores were completely gutted. Walking through those dark corridors with just a flashlight was unsettling enough, but what happened on his 3rd week made him quit immediately. Around 2 a.m., he was doing his usual patrol when he heard what sounded like a child crying coming from the old toy store. The sound echoed through the empty halls, bouncing off the walls in a way that made his skin crawl. He tried to convince himself it was just the wind or maybe a stray cat, but the crying was too distinct, too human. As he approached the toy store, his flashlight beam caught something that made his blood run cold. There were small, muddy footprints leading into the store. Child-sized footprints that definitely weren't there during his previous rounds. He called out, asking if anyone was there, but the crying stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the crying itself. Against his better judgment, he entered the store, following the footprints with his trembling flashlight. The footprints led to the back corner where old display shelves created a maze-like area. As he rounded the corner, he saw her, little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sitting in the corner with her back to him. She was wearing a dirty white dress, and her long black hair covered her face. He asked if she was okay, if she was lost, but she didn't respond. She just sat there, perfectly still. When he took a step closer, she slowly began to turn her head toward him. What he saw made him drop his flashlight and run. Her face should have been. There was nothing. Just smooth skin where her eyes, nose, and mouth should be. But somehow, impossibly, the crying sound was still coming from her. He ran out of that mall and never went back. The next day, he called his supervisor and quit over the phone. When the supervisor pressed him for details, he simply said he couldn't do it anymore. The supervisor mentioned that the previous guard had also quit suddenly after only 2 weeks, given the same vague explanation. The Reddit user later found out that the mall had been built on the site of an old orphanage that burned down in 1952, killing 12 children. He never found out if anyone else had seen the faceless girl, and he never wanted to know. Eleanor was a college student living alone in a studio apartment near campus. She was used to city noises, sirens, and the occasional drunk student walking by at night. But what started happening in her apartment was something else entirely. It began with her plants. Eleanor had always been good with plants, keeping several potted flowers and herbs on her windowsill. One morning, she woke up to find every single plant had been torn apart. Leaves scattered across the floor, stems broken, soil spilled everywhere. Her first thought was that someone had broken in, but nothing else was disturbed, and all her doors and windows were still locked from the inside. She cleaned up the mess and bought new plants, thinking maybe she had somehow done it in her sleep, though she had never been a sleepwalker. But 3 days later, it happened again. Every plant destroyed, but this time the soil had been arranged in strange patterns on the floor, spirals and symbols that looked almost like some kind of writing. Eleanor set up a camera in her apartment, determined to figure out what was happening. The footage from that night showed her sleeping peacefully until around 3 a.m. Then, impossibly, the plants began moving on their own. Teas started shaking violently, and one by one, the pots tipped over, spilling their contents. But what really terrified her was what happened next. The spilled soil began moving across the floor by itself, forming those same strange symbols she had seen before. It was as if invisible hands were drawing in the dirt. The camera recorded for another hour, but nothing else happened. Just those symbols written in soil while she slept. Eleanor researched the symbols online and discovered They were ancient Celtic runes associated with death and malevolent spirits. She learned that her building had been constructed on the site of an old cemetery that was moved in the 1960s. While the bodies had been relocated, some researchers believed that certain spirits remained tied to the land. The incidents escalated. Objects would move when she wasn't looking. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror would sometimes appear to be speaking, though she wasn't making any sound. Cold spots would appear randomly throughout the apartment, and she could swear she sometimes heard whispered conversations in a language she didn't recognize. Eleanor tried to ignore it, telling herself it was stress from school, but the breaking point came when she woke up one morning to find the same Celtic runes carved into her wooden desk. Keat, deep gouges in the wood that would have taken hours to make with a knife, yet she had slept through it all. She moved out that same day, staying with friends until she could find a new place. The landlord was initially angry about her breaking the lease early, but his attitude changed when she showed him photos of what had been happening. He admitted that several previous tenants had also left suddenly, all reporting strange incidents involving plants dying and mysterious symbols appearing in their apartments. Eleanor never found out what was causing the phenomena, but she made sure her next apartment was nowhere near any historical sites or old buildings. Some experiences, she decided, aren't worth investigating further. Levi worked a graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station on a lonely stretch of highway outside Denver. Most nights were quiet, with just the occasional trucker stopping for coffee and gas. But there was one customer who made him question whether he should find a different job. The man first appeared on a Tuesday night around 3:30 a.m. He was tall, probably in his 40s, wearing a clean black suit that seemed oddly formal for a gas station visit. What struck Levi immediately were the man's eyes. They were completely black, no visible pupils or irises, just solid black from edge to edge. The man bought a single candy bar and paid with exact change, never speaking beyond mumbling a barely audible thank you. Levi tried to make small talk, asking how his night was going, but the man just stared at him with those unsettling black eyes before walking back to his car. The strange thing was, Levi never saw the man's car leave. He watched him walk outside, but when Levi looked up from the register a few minutes later, the parking lot was empty. Skip the security cameras, but they showed the man entering the store and walking to the counter, then nothing. No footage of him leaving or of any vehicle in the parking lot. The man returned the following Tuesday at exactly the same time. Same black suit, same candy bar, same exact change. This time, Levi paid closer attention. The man's skin was pale, almost gray, and when he reached for his wallet, Levi noticed his fingernails were abnormally long and yellowed. Levi asked where he was headed, trying to sound casual, but the man's response sent chills down his spine. In a voice that sounded like dry leaves rustling, he said, "I'm looking for someone who used to work here, someone who left something behind." When Levi asked what he meant, the man just smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous for a human mouth. Then he left again, and once again, Levi couldn't see him actually exit the parking lot on the security cameras. This pattern continued for weeks. Every Tuesday at 3:30 a.m., the black-eyed man would appear by the same candy bar and make cryptic comments about looking for someone. Levi started dreading Tuesday nights, but he needed the job, and his manager wouldn't approve a schedule change without a good reason. One Tuesday, Levi decided to follow the man outside to see what happened to him. After the man paid and walked toward the door, Levi quickly stepped out from behind the counter and followed him. But when he pushed through the door, the parking lot was empty. No sign of the man, no car, nothing. Just the sound of wind blowing across the asphalt. When Levi noticed something that made his blood freeze. In the dust near the gas pumps, there were footprints leading from the store to the center of the parking lot, where they simply stopped, as if the man had just vanished into thin air. Levi quit 2 days later. He told his manager there was a family emergency and he had to move out of state immediately. The manager was frustrated but had to accept it. As Levi was cleaning out his locker, the day shift attendant mentioned that the previous night shift employee had also quit suddenly, claiming there was something wrong with the Tuesday night customers. Levi never found out what the black-eyed man was looking for, and he made sure to never drive past that gas station again. Some mysteries, he realized, are better left unsolved. Madeline had always been proud of her antique music box collection. She'd been collecting them since childhood, and now, at 28, she had over 40 beautiful pieces displayed throughout her house. Each one had a story, whether it was a family heirloom or a unique find from an estate sale. The problem started after she purchased a particularly ornate music box from an estate sale in Salem, Massachusetts. It was Victorian era, with intricate carvings of dancing figures around the base and a delicate ballerina that spun when the music played. The melody was hauntingly beautiful but unfamiliar, not one of the typical tunes found in most music boxes. On the first night after bringing it home, Madeline was awakened at 3 a.m. by the sound of music. Not just one tune, but several different melodies playing at once. Every music box in our house was playing simultaneously. She walked through her house in confusion, manually stopping each one, but they kept starting up again as soon as she moved to the next room. When she returned to her bedroom, the Victorian music box was playing its mysterious melody, and the little ballerina was spinning faster than should have been mechanically possible. Madeline reached to close it, but the moment her fingers touched the lid, she was hit with a vision so vivid it felt real. She saw a young woman in Victorian dress standing in a dimly lit room, tears streaming down her face as she wound a music box. The same music box now sitting on Madeline's dresser. The woman was saying goodbye to someone, speaking about how she would always be with them as long as the music played. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left Madeline shaken. She unplugged the music box and put it in her closet, hoping that would solve the problem. But that night, she was awakened again by music, and when she checked, all her music boxes were playing again, including the one that was supposedly turned off in her closet. For the following weeks, the occurrences became more frequent and more disturbing. Madeline would come home from work to find all the music boxes playing, sometimes with their lids spinning in impossible ways. Objects in her house would be moved slightly, always in a neat, precise manner, as if someone was carefully rearranging things. The most unsettling incident happened when Madeline brought a friend over for dinner. As they were eating, they heard the faint sound of a woman humming coming from upstairs. When they investigated, they found the Victorian music box playing. But instead of the usual melody, it was playing the exact tune the woman had been humming. Madeline's friend left immediately, claiming the house felt oppressive and wrong. Madeline couldn't blame her, but she also couldn't bring herself to get rid of the music boxes. They were her passion, her collection that had taken years to build. The final straw came when Madeline woke up one morning to find a handwritten note on her nightstand, written in old-fashioned script. "Thank you for keeping our music alive. We are not ready to be silent forever." Madeline packed up the Victorian music box that same day and drove back to Salem. She found the estate sale company and demanded to know the history of the piece. Reluctantly, they told her it had belonged to a woman named Eleanor who had died in 1894. Eleanor had been obsessed with music boxes and had collected dozens of them. When she died, her family claimed they could still hear music playing throughout the house at night, even after removing all the music boxes. Madeline returned the music box and demanded a full refund. The estate sale manager agreed immediately, seeming relieved to take it back. As Madeline left the shop, she could have sworn she heard the faint sound of a woman crying coming from inside the building. Other music boxes never played by themselves again, but Madeline found she couldn't enjoy them the same way. The joy had been replaced by an underlying fear that she might unknowingly invite something else into her home. she eventually sold most of her collection, keeping only a few pieces that held special family memories. Some hobbies, she learned, can become doorways to experiences you never wanted to have. Jace was an experienced urban explorer who had been sneaking into abandoned buildings for over 10 years. He'd seen his share of creepy places, from old hospitals to defunct factories. But nothing had ever truly scared him until he explored the abandoned Riverside Elementary School in Detroit. The school had been closed for 15 years due to budget cuts and structural problems. Most of the windows were boarded up, but Jace found a way in through a loose panel in the back. His plan was to take some photographs for his urban exploration blog and then leave, a routine he'd followed hundreds of times before. The interior was typical of abandoned schools, debris scattered across the floors, graffiti covering the walls, and that musty smell of decay and neglect. Jace methodically worked his way through the building, photographing empty classrooms and hallways filled with broken furniture. Everything seemed normal until he reached the second floor and heard what sounded like children's voices coming from one of the classrooms. Faint at first, like whispered conversations, but as he approached the room, the voices became clearer. He could make out individual words, children asking questions and reciting lessons. Jace assumed it must be kids from the neighborhood who had also found a way inside, though it seemed strange that they would be playing school in such a place. He pushed open the classroom door, expecting to find a group of children, but the room was empty. The voices stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. No sounds of movement or breathing, nothing to indicate anyone had been there moments before. Jace called out, asking if anyone was there, but received no response. He searched the room thoroughly, checking behind overturned desks and in the supply closets, but found nothing. As he was about to leave, he noticed something that made him pause. On the dusty chalkboard at the front of the room, someone had written a simple math problem. 8 plus 4 equals. The chalk writing looked fresh, with no dust covering it, like everything else in the building. Jace took a photo of the chalkboard and continued his exploration, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every few minutes, he would hear the soft sound of footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, the hallways were empty. In another classroom, he found children's drawings scattered across the floor, fresh drawings on clean paper, depicting stick figures of children playing together. At the bottom of each drawing was a date from just 3 days ago. This was impossible, as the building had been sealed for years. The most disturbing discovery came when Jace reached the school's main office. Sitting on the principal's desk was an attendance sheet filled out in neat handwriting. The date at the top was today's date, and listed were the names of 23 students, all marked present. At the bottom of the sheet, someone had written, "New teachers started today. The children are so excited to learn again." Jace left the building immediately, not bothering to finish his photography session. When he got home and developed his photos, he discovered something that made him question his own sanity. In several of the pictures, particularly those taken in the classroom where he heard voices, there were faint outlines of what appeared to be children sitting at desks. The figures were translucent, barely visible, but undeniably there. Small shapes in school clothes, sitting attentively as if listening to a lesson. In one photo, taken just after he heard the voices stop, there was a clearer image of a little girl standing near the chalkboard, her hand raised as if asking a question. Jace researched the school's history and discovered that in 1987, a fire had trapped several children in that same second-floor classroom. While most of the school evacuated safely, 8 children died from smoke inhalation before firefighters could reach them. The classroom where Jace heard voices was the exact room where the children had died. He never returned to explore abandoned schools after that experience. The photos remain in his collection, but he's never shared them publicly or posted them on his blog. Some places, he realized, aren't abandoned at all. They're still occupied by those who never got the chance to leave. Mary worked as a night nurse at Hillcrest Manor, a nursing home that specialized in caring for elderly patients with dementia. She'd been working there for 2 years and thought she'd seen everything the job could throw at her. Patients with dementia often experience confusion, hallucinations, and behavioral changes, especially at night. But what happened during her shift on Halloween night was beyond anything she'd encountered in her medical training. It started with Mrs. Stetson in room 237. At 89 years old, she had advanced Alzheimer's and rarely spoke coherently anymore. But around midnight, Mary heard her having what sounded like a normal conversation with someone. When Mary checked on her, Mrs. Stetson was sitting up in bed, speaking clearly and logically to the empty chair beside her. She was saying things like, "Yes, I remember when we used to dance, and you look exactly the same as the day you left." When Mary asked who she was talking to, Mrs. Stetson looked at her with the clearest eyes she'd had in months and said, "My husband, Robert, he's come to visit me." Robert had died 12 years ago. Mary chalked it up to a particularly vivid hallucination and noted it in Mrs. Stetson's chart. But as the night progressed, similar incidents began happening throughout the facility. Patients who normally didn't recognize their own family members were having detailed conversations with invisible visitors, speaking about people and events from decades ago with perfect clarity. Mr. Torres, in room 241, was speaking rapid Spanish to someone he called his mother, who had died when he was a child in Mexico. Mrs. Yamamoto was having an animated discussion in Japanese with her deceased sister about their childhood in Hiroshima before the war. The conversations were too specific, too detailed to be random hallucinations. What made Mary truly uneasy was that she could sometimes hear responses, faint voices that seemed to be answering the patients, though she could never quite make out the words. The temperature in the hallways dropped noticeably, and several times she caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, shadows that shouldn't have been there. The strangest incident occurred with Mr. Walsh, a former teacher who had been nonverbal for over a year. Mary found him sitting at his room's small table, apparently grading papers that weren't there. He was using a pen to write comments on invisible assignments, speaking aloud as he worked. "Very good work, Tommy. You've improved so much since September," he said, then paused as if listening to a response. "Yes, I know it's been difficult since your father left, but you're doing wonderfully." When Mary approached him, Mr. Walsh looked up and said, "Oh, hello, okay. I'm just finishing up with my students. They wanted to visit me tonight, okay?" He gestured to the empty space around his table. "It's so nice to see them all again, even the ones who've been gone for so long." Mary realized he was talking about students from his decades of teaching, including some who had likely passed away over the years. The detail in his conversations suggested he was seeing and interacting with specific individuals, not just generic figures from his memories. The night reached its climax around 3 a.m. when Mary heard singing coming from the common room. She found 8 residents, all with severe dementia, sitting together and singing hymns in perfect harmony. These were patients who usually couldn't remember their own names, yet they were performing complex 4-part harmonies of songs from their youth. As Mary watched in amazement, she noticed that the residents seemed to be following the lead of someone she couldn't see. They would pause at the same moments, start new verses together, and their eyes tracked something moving around the room that was invisible to her. When the singing ended, the patients slowly returned to their rooms without being asked, moving with a purpose and clarity that was completely unlike their usual confused wandering. Within an hour, they had all returned to their normal states of confusion and memory loss, as if the night's events had never happened. Mary documented everything in the incident reports, though she knew how unbelievable it would sound. When she mentioned it to the day shift supervisor, she discovered that similar events had been reported before, always on significant dates or during times when multiple residents were nearing the end of their lives. The supervisor explained that many staff members believed the facility was visited by the spirits of deceased family members and friends who came to comfort the residents during their final journey. Mary had always been skeptical of such things, but after that night, she couldn't dismiss what she had witnessed. She continued working at Hillcrest Manor for another year, and while she never experienced anything quite as dramatic as that Halloween night, she often noticed residents having meaningful conversations with invisible companions during her shifts. She learned to accept it as part of the job, though she never stopped wondering who the patients were really talking to in those quiet midnight hours. Tristan was a delivery driver for a local pizza company, working the late shift to make extra money for college. Most deliveries were routine, but there was one address that made him consider quitting altogether. 1428 Elm Street, a house at the end of a dead-end road on the outskirts of town. It's the first time Tristan delivered to that address. He noticed immediately that something was off about the house. It was a two-story colonial that looked well-maintained from the outside, but all the windows were covered with heavy curtains, and there were no signs of normal household activity. No cars in the driveway, no lights visible from outside, no landscaping or decorative touches that suggested someone actually lived there. When Tristan rang the doorbell, it took several minutes before anyone answered. The person who opened the door was a middle-aged woman with pale skin and dark circles under her eyes. She looked exhausted, almost ill, and she barely made eye contact when she took the pizza and paid. Her hands were ice cold when she handed him the money, and she spoke in a whisper that Tristan could barely hear. What made the interaction truly unsettling was that Tristan could hear voices coming from inside the house, multiple people having conversations, but the woman at the door was clearly alone. When he asked if everything was okay, she just nodded quickly and closed the door, but Tristan could still hear the voices through the walls as he walked back to his car. For the next few months, Tristan delivered to that address 7 more times. The orders always came late at night, between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., and they were always for multiple pizzas, as if the woman was feeding several people. But Tristan never saw anyone else, and the woman always answered the door alone. Each visit became more disturbing than the last. The woman grew progressively thinner and more sickly looking, and the voices from inside the house became louder and more agitated. Tristan started to hear what sounded like arguments, with the woman's voice pleading and other voices responding angrily. On his 6th delivery to the house, Tristan noticed that the woman's arms were covered in what looked like bruises, though she quickly pulled down her sleeves when she saw him looking. When he asked if she needed help, or if he should call someone, she became visibly frightened and begged him not to involve anyone else. "They don't like strangers," she whispered, glancing nervously back into the house. "Please, just bring the food and leave. Don't ask questions." The final delivery Tristan made to that address was on a particularly cold November night. The woman answered the door. She looked terrible. Her skin was gray, her eyes were sunken, and she could barely stand upright. The voices from inside the house were so loud that Tristan could clearly make out individual words. Multiple people were shouting angrily, blaming someone for various problems and demanding solutions. Here's what made Tristan's blood run cold. He recognized some of the voices. They sounded exactly like people from the neighborhood who had gone missing over the past year. Mrs. Patterson, who disappeared while walking her dog. Tom Bradley, a local mechanic who vanished from his shop one evening. Sarah Chen, a college student who never made it home from the library. When Tristan mentioned hearing familiar voices, the woman's face went completely white. She grabbed his arm with surprising strength and said, "You need to forget what you heard here. They're not supposed to know that people can hear them. If they find out, they'll want you to stay too." Before Tristan could ask what she meant, the voices inside suddenly stopped. The silence was immediate and complete, as if someone had turned off a radio. The woman looked terrified and quickly shoved money at Tristan, telling him to leave and never come back. Tristan ran to his car and drove away as fast as he could. When he got back to the pizza shop, he told his manager he was feeling sick and needed to go home early. The next day, he called in and quit his job, claiming he had found better employment elsewhere. 3 weeks later, Tristan saw a news report that made his hand shake. The woman from 1428 Elm Street had been found dead in her home, apparently from malnutrition and dehydration. When police searched the house, they found it completely empty, except for stacks of pizza boxes in every room. The strangest part was that neighbors reported hearing voices and conversations coming from the house for months after the woman's death, even though the building remained vacant. Tristan never told anyone about what he had heard during his deliveries to that house. He moved to another city for college and never returned to his hometown. Some knowledge, he realized, is too dangerous to share, especially when you're not sure if the voices you heard were from the living or the dead. Nora was a freelance photographer who specialized in real estate photography, taking pictures of homes for sale to post online. It was steady work that allowed her to set her own schedule, and she enjoyed seeing different properties throughout the city. But one assignment made her reconsider whether the independence was worth the occasional nightmare. The house was a beautiful Victorian mansion in an upscale neighborhood, listed for far below market value due to what the realtor called unusual circumstances. The owner wanted to sell quickly and was willing to take a significant loss to make it happen. Nora's job was to photograph the interior and exterior to create an attractive online listing. When Nora arrived at the property, she was impressed by the home's architecture and period details. The realtor, Mrs. Williams, met her at the front door and provided a brief tour, pointing out features to highlight in the photos. Everything seemed normal, though Nora noticed that Mrs. Williams seemed eager to finish quickly and kept checking her watch. "I'll leave you to work," Mrs. Williams said after the tour. "Just lock up when you're finished and drop the keys through the mail slot. I have another appointment I need to get to." Nora found it odd that the realtor would leave her alone in such an expensive property, but she appreciated being able to work without someone looking over her shoulder. She started with the ground floor, methodically photographing each room from multiple angles to showcase the space effectively. The problems began when she reached the second floor. As Nora was setting up her tripod in the master bedroom, she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her. Assuming Mrs. Williams had returned, she called out a greeting, but received no response. When she checked the hall, it was empty, and she could see through the front windows that the realtor's car was still gone. Nora continued working, but the footsteps persisted. They seemed to follow her from room to room, always just behind her, stopping when she stopped and starting again when she moved. The sound was distinct. Slow, deliberate steps on the hardwood floors, with a slight creak of old boards underweight. In the third bedroom, Nora experienced something that made her question her own senses. As she was adjusting her camera settings, she heard the unmistakable sound of a door closing somewhere in the house. She had left all the doors open to move easily between rooms, so she went to investigate. Every door on the second floor was now closed. Doors that had been standing wide open just minutes before were now shut tight. Nora opened them again and returned to her work, but within minutes, she heard the same sounds. When she checked again, all the doors were closed once more. This pattern continued for the next hour. No matter how many times Nora opened the doors, they would close by themselves when she wasn't looking. She started timing it and discovered that the doors closed every 12 minutes, almost like clockwork. The most disturbing incident occurred when Nora was photographing the master bathroom. Through her camera's viewfinder, she saw movement in the mirror behind her. When she turned around, no one was there, but the mirror showed what appeared to be a figure standing in the doorway. A tall man in old-fashioned clothing, watching her work. Nora lowered her camera and looked directly at the doorway, but saw nothing. When she raised the camera again and looked through the viewfinder, the figure was still visible in the mirror's reflection, now closer than before. She tried taking a photo, but when she reviewed the image, the mirror showed only her own reflection. As Nora packed up her equipment to leave, she heard voices coming from downstairs. A man and woman having what sounded like a heated argument about money and debts. Nora called out, asking if Mrs. Williams had returned, but the voices stopped immediately. When she reached the ground floor, the house was empty. No signs that anyone had been there. No cars outside. Nothing to explain the voices she had clearly heard. Tina locked up quickly and left, dropping the keys through the mail slot as instructed. When she got home and began processing the photos, Nora discovered something that made her decide never to take another real estate assignment. In several of the images, particularly those taken on the second floor, there were figures visible that she hadn't seen while taking the pictures. In the master bedroom photo, a woman in a white nightgown was sitting on the edge of the bed. In the hallway shot, the same tall man from the mirror was standing at the top of the stairs. Most disturbing was a photo from the third bedroom, which showed what appeared to be a child hiding in the closet, barely visible behind the hanging clothes. Nora called Mrs. Williams to ask about the house's history, but the realtor's number had been disconnected. When Nora contacted the real estate agency, they told her they had no agent by that name and no record of the property being listed with their company. Nora researched the address and discovered that the house had been vacant for over 3 years, ever since the previous owners died in what police ruled a murder-suicide. The husband had apparently killed his wife and child before taking his own life, citing financial ruin and mounting debts in a note found at the scene. Nora never found out who had hired her to photograph the house or how they had gotten her contact information. She deleted all the photos from that assignment and never spoke about the experience publicly. Some jobs, she learned, come with hidden costs that no amount of money can justify. Tyler was a college student who worked part-time at the campus library, usually covering the late evening shifts when most students were either studying or partying elsewhere. The library was typically quiet during these hours, with just a few dedicated students working on projects or preparing for exams. But during finals week of his junior year, Tyler encountered something that made him question everything he thought he knew about the building he'd worked in for 2 years. The incidents began on a Tuesday night around 10 p.m. Tyler was working alone at the circulation desk when he heard the distinctive sound of books falling somewhere in the stacks. He went to investigate, expecting to find that someone had accidentally knocked over a pile of materials. But when he reached the area where the sound had come from, everything was perfectly organized. As Tyler was walking back to the desk, he heard the sound again, this time coming from a different section of the library. Once again, when he investigated, he found nothing out of place. This pattern continued for the next hour, with books apparently falling in various parts of the building, but no evidence of any disturbance when Tyler went to check. Around 11:30 p.m., Tyler heard something that made him freeze at his desk. Someone was typing on one of the library's public computers, the rapid clicking of keys echoing through the quiet building. Tyler could see all the computer stations from his position at the circulation desk, and every single one was empty. He walked over to the computer area to investigate and found that one of the terminals was indeed active, with text appearing on the screen as if someone was typing. The words were garbled at first, random letters and symbols, but gradually they began forming coherent sentences. "Can you see me? I've been trying to get someone's attention for so long." Tyler stared at the screen in disbelief. The typing continued without anyone sitting at the computer, the cursor moving across the screen as new text appeared. "I used to study here every night. It's 3rd floor, corner table by the window. I had so much work to finish." Tyler's hands were shaking as he typed the response. "Who are you?" The reply came immediately. "My name is David Chen. I was a graduate student in the engineering program. I think something happened to me, but I can't remember what. All I know is that I can't leave this building." Tyler remembered hearing about a graduate student who had died in the library 3 years ago. David Chen had been found dead at his usual study spot on the 3rd floor, apparently from a heart attack brought on by stress and lack of sleep. during finals week. Tyler had started working at the library the semester after the incident. The conversation continued for the next 20 minutes, with David explaining that he had been trying to communicate with people for years, but Tyler was the first person who had been able to see his messages. Kay described being trapped in the library, able to observe everything that happened, but unable to interact with the physical world except through the computers. I watched students study in my spot every night, David typed. I tried to help them sometimes, moving their books to pages they need or highlighting important passages, but they never notice. They just assume they did it themselves. Tyler asked David what he wanted, what would help him move on. The response was heartbreaking. I just want to finish my dissertation. I was so close when I died. It's 3 more chapters and I would have had my PhD. All my research is still saved on the university servers, but I can't access it from here. Against his better judgment, Tyler offered to help. He used his employee access to log into the university's research database and locate David's incomplete dissertation. For the next several hours, David dictated the remaining chapters through the computer, drawing on 3 years of continued observation and research that he had somehow been conducting even after death. The sun began to rise, and Tyler prepared to close the library for the night. David's final message appeared on the screen. Thank you for helping me finish what I started. I can feel something changing. I think I can finally leave now. The computer screen went blank, and Tyler never received another message from David Chen. When he checked the research database later, he found that David's completed dissertation had been automatically submitted to the graduate school, fulfilling all requirements for his posthumous PhD degree. Tyler continued working at the library for the rest of his college career, but he never experienced any more paranormal activity. The 3rd floor corner table became a popular study spot again, with students often commenting on how productive they felt when working there, as if some positive energy helped them focus on their studies. Tyler graduated the following year and moved on with his life, but he kept a copy of David's completed dissertation. Sometimes, when his own work felt overwhelming, he would remember David's dedication to finishing what he had started, even after death. It reminded him that some commitments transcend the boundaries between life and death. Amanda was a property manager for a large apartment complex downtown, responsible for showing units to potential tenants and handling maintenance requests. She'd been doing the job for 5 years and prided herself on being practical and level-headed. Never one to believe in ghost stories or supernatural nonsense, but apartment 4B changed her perspective on what was possible in the world. The unit had been vacant for 8 months, which was unusual for their building. It was a nice 2-bedroom apartment with updated fixtures and a great view of the city, priced competitively with similar units in the area. Several people had put in applications, but every single one had withdrawn their interest after viewing the apartment. Amanda had shown the unit dozens of times, and while she noticed that potential tenants seemed uncomfortable during tours, she attributed it to normal apartment hunting anxiety. The unit was clean, well-maintained, and move-in ready. She couldn't understand why no one wanted to rent it. The first sign that something was genuinely wrong came during a showing with a young couple looking for their first apartment together. They were enthusiastic about the building and the rent price, but within minutes of entering apartment 4B, both of them became visibly distressed. The woman started crying for no apparent reason, and the man became agitated and aggressive, snapping at Amanda about trivial details like the color of the walls and the placement of light switches. By the time they reached the bedroom, the couple was having a full-blown argument about things that had nothing to do with the apartment. They left abruptly, and Amanda received a call the next day from the woman, apologizing for their behavior. She explained that neither of them could understand what had happened, as they never fought like that, and had been excited about the apartment before the viewing. This pattern repeated with every subsequent showing. Couples would enter the apartment happy and leave in the middle of heated arguments. Single people would become depressed or anxious, often mentioning that the apartment made them feel hopeless or overwhelmed. Families with children would have their kids become inconsolable, crying and begging to leave. Amanda started paying closer attention during showings and noticed environmental changes that she had previously overlooked. The temperature in apartment 4B was consistently colder than other units, even when the heating system was working properly. There were also strange acoustics in the apartment, with sounds from the hallway seeming muffled, while noises from within the unit seemed unnaturally amplified. The breaking point came during a showing with a divorced father who was looking for a place where his teenage daughter could visit on weekends. The man seemed perfect for the unit, financially stable and willing to sign a lease immediately. But 10 minutes into the tour, he suddenly became angry and started yelling about how his ex-wife had ruined his life and taken everything from him. The outburst was completely unprovoked and so intense that Amanda felt genuinely frightened. The man's personality had completely changed, transforming from polite and friendly to bitter and violent in a matter of minutes. He stormed out of the apartment, leaving Amanda shaken and confused. That evening, Amanda decided to research the history of apartment 4B. What she discovered explained everything she had been experiencing. The previous tenant, Robert Martinez, had lived in the unit for 3 years before his death. According to news reports, Robert had been going through a difficult divorce and custody battle that had left him financially ruined and emotionally devastated. On the night he died, Robert had called his ex-wife and left a series of increasingly angry voicemails, blaming her for destroying his life and expressing his hatred for everything and everyone around him. He was found the next morning, having taken his own life in the apartment's bedroom. Amanda realized that the emotional states she had been witnessing during showings perfectly matched Robert's mental state during his final months. The apartment seemed to be amplifying and projecting the same feelings of anger, despair, and hopelessness that Robert had experienced before his death. Armed with this knowledge, Amanda approached her supervisor about the situation. She expected skepticism, but instead learned that several other properties in the company's portfolio had similar issues with units where traumatic events had occurred. The company had protocols for dealing with such situations, including hiring specialized cleaning services that addressed more than just physical contamination. The apartment underwent what the company called energetic remediation, a process that Amanda didn't fully understand, but that seemed to involve both physical cleaning and some kind of spiritual cleansing performed by people who specialize in such matters. After the remediation, Amanda noticed an immediate difference in apartment 4B. The temperature normalized, the acoustics became normal, and most importantly, potential tenants no longer experienced dramatic mood changes during showings. The unit was rented within 2 weeks to a young professional who has lived there happily for over a year. Amanda never learned the exact details of what the remediation process involved, and she preferred it that way. She continued working as a property manager, but with the new understanding that some problems require solutions beyond conventional maintenance and repair. Sometimes, she realized, the most practical approach is to acknowledge that there are forces in the world that can't be explained by logic alone.